Hey everybody, welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers and Joseph Bennett hanging out with Michael Hidalgo today. And I'm super excited to talk with this guy because he was referred to me, and we have actually had a conversation. He was referred to me by Lance Witt. And I'm like, if you are referred to somebody by Lance Witt, you must be like way up there in the upper echelons of, like heavenly leaders. So Michael, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing well, but now you've set the bar high, so I'm feeling just a little bit of pressure.
You don't need to feel any pressure, man. Lance sent us an introductory email, and I'm like, man, absolutely. First of all, that Lance would even think of me to share anybody with was encouraging. But you and I had a conversation recently, and I thought, man, we got to get you on the podcast. Joseph, how are you doing today? Before we dive into Michael,
It is a great Tuesday, so I'm excited to have this conversation with Michael. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
take a few moments and tell us a little bit of your just the backstory before we kind of get into the meat of the podcast.
Yeah. So been a pastor for 26 years now. I still get messed up with years from COVID. It still
Yeah.
messes with me.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
COVID, you don't
But
count. Take that one out.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, so worked in two different churches in Grand Rapids, Michigan, then moved to Denver in 2007 and stepped into the role of lead pastor at Denver Community Church. And in 2023, really sensed after a long time of prayer and discernment that I had done what was mine to do. So we entered a 2-year succession process. Um, and I finished up almost 2 years. It was 2 years ago, May 8, no, 1 year ago, May 18,
Mm,
coming up. And in the process of that, found myself, there was really two things stirring. One was I love the local church. I really believe it's the best tangible expression of the kingdom.
mhm.
And while I was stepping out of the role within a particular local church, was beginning to feel myself ask questions of how can I serve the local church in a different way. And so I began praying, God, what do you want me to do with you in the world? And that's where this idea that led me to you, Dale, through Lance, called Menuah, came up. And I think that's what we're here to talk about.
Before we dive into that, I'm very interested in, can you walk us through how you guys did succession? Because it's a passion of mine, uh, really, because most churches don't do it very well. And so when you have a 2-year plan and you do it, and then probably before you even dive that, you just sensed it was time to leave. Is that what you just said?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
okay, so kind of walk us through that.
So I was on sabbatical in 2022
Okay.
and took a total during the time, it was a total of 2 weeks of solitude and silence that I took. And when midway through, I was at a monastery and I had a 1 week retreat model, and the subject happened to be obedience. And so I did a lot of reading about obedience and found that it means not only to hear and do, but to hear and respond. So it's less a command, and I felt it was just this big invitation. So when I came back from sabbatical, my first sermon back was titled "The One About Obedience," and I said, God is inviting all of us to work alongside Him in the world. And when I got in my car after, it was one of the few times I can say I really heard God speak.
Hmm.
And He said, "So, what are you going to do with me in the world?"
Hmm.
And there was a way it felt that it was like, it's not here at Denver Community Church anymore.
Hmm.
So I resisted, honestly, because I loved the work and I loved the people and loved the people I worked alongside.
I
And
imagine it was pretty secure too.
oh yeah, very secure, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I came home and talked to my wife about it, and she didn't bat an eye. She didn't panic. She didn't say we have to leave now. Um, she said, "Well, that's interesting." And really, we entered a long conversation, and then we have a community of families that we have been connected to since we've moved here. And I brought it to them, and we began a conversation. And there was one conversation in particular where one of the men in the group said, "What are you dreaming about? Like, what's next for you in DCC?" And I said, "Man, I don't know." And he said, "Every time I've asked you that question, you've had a response locked and loaded." And he said, "I'd pay attention to that." And that was really, I kept asking God, like, what do you want from me here? And it was like crickets. And I told our elder team, I said, I think I could probably hit cruise control here for the next 10 years
Yep.
and nobody would be upset. But that wouldn't be fair to what God's calling me to do. It wouldn't be fair to the people that have entrusted me to lead them. And it wouldn't be fair to me ultimately.
Mm-mm.
And so, yeah, that was September. I think I told our board in June. So it was 9 months. Perfect time for gestation.
Yep.
And
I've got
and
a
yeah,
lot of those
so
in my life, a lot of the 9-month things in my life as well.
exactly. So yeah, the way we did succession is we hired a consultant, which I think is really important
Yep.
because he was able to be objective. And one of the early conversations we had, I said, my job since I've been here has been to cast vision, to point toward the future, to talk about here's where we're going. I feel like if I do that, what can happen is the people who are leading this are going to try to find someone who can accomplish the vision God's given me.
Yeah, you're gonna tie their hands.
Exactly. And I said, I think we'll be best served if I really spend the next 2 years truly caring for and pastoring this congregation. And what that looked like at the staff level was it was just full on leadership development like I'd never had in the last, I think it was 6 to 10 months. One of the staff members said, we want Michael's greatest hits. Like we want to be able to ask you questions and like we want to hear what are your biggest leadership learnings since you've been here. So that's what I did. And the only thing I was involved in was the latter stages of the interviews around culture and theology. Um, Other than that, I was very hands off, and um, it was actually wonderful because it allowed me to leave well because we grieved together, we laughed together, we told stories and remembered together. And I said, my last Sunday, I want there to be tears and hugs and high fives. And there were tears and there were hugs. And I'm not kidding. This guy, without knowing I had said that, walked down front after and he gave me a high five. And I just started laughing. I was like, this is perfect.
That's cool.
But yeah, we had a team of combined of lay leaders and board members and staff. And then we did a lot of listening to the congregation about what are you sensing you want in the next leader. And they made it really clear we're not trying to find Michael 2.0.
Yeah.
Good.
We're trying to find the person that God is calling to this role.
Wow. Man, that's a really incredible journey, Michael. It sounds like you guys were super intentional with that because obviously that's not something that you just haphazardly did, right? There was a
No.
plan, there was intentionality. And then you said something a moment ago. You said God was kind of like, hey, now, Michael, what are you going to go do with me in the world? So it's led you on this journey to now go out into the world and do something. And you hinted to it a few moments ago, but kind of tell us what you're doing now. Like what are you doing in the world now, Michael?
Yeah. Well, I had the best laid plans on my way out, which is not what I'm doing
Yeah,
now.
and that never
Okay,
works.
there you go. Yeah, let's
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
it. Yeah,
Forget
That's why I
about
say
that.
that.
yeah.
I had connected to a consulting group based out of the UK, and my real interest was learning their process because it's really, I would say, a deep dive into the personal lives of individuals. So it's not the I mean, I still tell people if you want to learn about how to automate your systems, I'm not your guy. If you want to learn about strategy, I'm not your guy. Um, so my vision was, I wonder how I could bring this, to leaders in the marketplace, and then also to pastors and churches. And I had done some work there, um, but as I mentioned earlier, I was praying, what do you want me to do in the world? And my wife was the one who said, you're going to have to scratch the local church itch. Like you're never going to shake that. And so on my way out, this was probably 3, 4 months before I was done. I had lunch with a pastor, and he's a solo pastor. They average about 100 to 120 on a Sunday.
Mhm.
And he said, hey, you're going to be a free agent. Would you come preach for me? And I happened to be out of town that weekend and said, well, do you know so and so? He said, no. I said, I bet you he'd do it. So I connected them. And he called me a week later, and he was all choked up. His voice was cracking. And he said, "Thank you so much for getting me a replacement or a substitute." And, I honestly at that point didn't think of it as
Sure.
that big of a deal. And I said, "No problem." He said, "I'm going to be able to take a vacation longer than 6 days with my family for the first time in 5 years." And I was really surprised
That's the
that he
norm.
hadn't been able to do that. It's the norm.
It's
It
the norm.
exactly is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then I had lunch with two other friends in town, both solo pastors, and they were just sharing about how tired they are, how worn out they are. And, I understand it. But not to their level. I
Yeah.
don't. And said to both of them, "Have you ever thought about sabbatical?" And they had the identical response. They laughed, looked at me like I was a moron, and said, "How would I ever do that?"
Yeah.
Mm.
A small
Mm.
church setting again.
Yep, small
Yep.
church setting.
Yeah, I understand.
And I had this moment of thinking, I know what I could do. I could like substitute for those guys. I've got a body of work. I've got, a sermon catalog. And then I started thinking about how many people like me there are out there where we're no longer tethered to a specific local congregation, but we still believe in the church, we still love Jesus, still believe in caring for congregations. So I started making phone calls to both friends of mine who are in Christian ministry, former pastors, friends who are in ministry as pastors, and said, "How many people do you know? Like, if I began the network, would raise their hand and say, I'd go do that." And all of them said the same thing. "I don't think anyone's doing this," which they're right. And the second thing they said was, "Oh, there's a lot of people out there that could do it." One guy said, I have a fleet of pastors in my church that I would send out anywhere in my city to serve like that on a Sunday. I'd let them miss on, a few Sundays. And so just the ball started rolling quickly. And as I began speaking to people, there were two other individuals. One is named Scott Reeves. He's down in Austin, Texas. His dad was a solo pastor of a small church. Scott currently works at Riverbend Church and said, "Whatever you need me to do to help you." I saw my dad just like really get exhausted and burned out.
Hmm.
And then Kaylee Estes, she works at a church in Oklahoma. She was the operations director for an international law firm. So if you can imagine
Hmm.
like all the bits and pieces. So I called her from just a strategic standpoint and said, what questions am I not asking? And she asked me about 25 questions that I hadn't even thought to ask. And then I said to her, "Is there any chance you'd want to jump in on this?" And she got all choked up because she had just heard a sermon about holding things loosely because you never know what God's going to bring your way.
Hmm.
And we were off and running. That was July at this point, was when we met here at my house for strategic planning for 2 days. And then had an EIN by August and nonprofit shortly after. And it's been so encouraging. And we're really, really excited for how we're serving people.
So you're doing more than preaching for people, though.
We are. So the specifically on the staffing side of things, it's pulpit supply, congregational care, and administrative support. But the other question, and I just met with a couple in Boston, they said, "How do we begin talking to our board about this?" Which is almost the first question once they realize
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
can provide staffing. So we go through, here's how to introduce it to your board. Here's how to begin implementing the policy. Here's how to communicate it to your congregation so they don't get suspicious and think maybe this is a leave of absence and not a real true sabbatical.
Hmm.
And then we walk them through a whole framework for planning it, because I always say to them, what's going to make your sabbatical terrible is if you don't have a plan. And so it can feel confining, but I said, even the times where you're going to sit around and do nothing and just take naps in the middle of the day, schedule all those things, because once you're in that structure, you have tremendous freedom and you have built-in accountability with the board who's approved it. So we do that. Then we do a little bit of work with the congregation in helping them reframe. Part of the sabbatical planning is the pastor that we're serving really delegates responsibility, because people need to do certain things that they're typically doing. That can be from setting up chairs to doing the bulletin. And we begin to speak with them about how do you, when this pastor returns, share the load so that they're not burned out 6 months after this gift that they were given. And then we walk with them through reentry. What does it look like to reenter? How do you report out or share about what God's taught you? How do you get briefed on all of the things that happen in your absence? Well, what do you do with the mountain of email that you walk into? And then what we're doing as a part of our funding is saying with these churches, would you consider being a partner with us so you can pass this on and give this gift to another congregation?
So
It's a pretty
is it
thoroughgoing.
free to the church that receives it? Is that what I hear?
We ask them to provide the pulpit supply that they can, and then we'll supplement it based on who the pastor is that's coming in and serving the church. But everything else, all the consulting, which is really what it is around implementing sabbatical, all of that is free.
Well,
Michael,
I can't imagine doing this when I was pastoring a small church. I just, that's amazing. What were you going to say, Joe?
I was just going to say, Michael, are you guys suggesting the specific time frame for each pastor, or is that held a little bit loosely? It sounds like you're definitely suggesting the model, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. What we found, and I did some research on this and had a lot of conversations, is, talked about my friend earlier in the conversation who hadn't taken a Sunday off in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
To walk in and say, hey man, take 3 months is
Yeah.
you're going from 0 to 100, right?
Yeah.
So a great example would be this pastor I met with in Boston. He's never taken one in 9 years. And I said, can you take 2 weeks off this summer? And he thought, well, I have one Sunday off. I said, good, take 2, right in a row. And so for some, it's more of a gradual stepping into starting with a couple of weeks, moving it to 4 weeks, down the road, and then, working up to 6 weeks or 2 months, 3 months. But what we found is that when sabbatical has never been a part of the culture, to all of a sudden take 12 weeks off feels impossible. So we suggest a total of 3 months over 2 years. And that's a plan right out of the Lilly Clergy Renewal playbook. And I learned that directly from them. And they said since they've been introducing 3 months over 2 years versus 3 full months at a time, the applications for their grant have gone up 30% because it's doable. And that's what we really want to do. We want to make this doable, not just say, here's our system. If you fit in it, good. If not, forget it.
Well, there's so many churches in the small church setting that do not understand, and I think it's even fair to say, or appreciate the value of sabbatical for their pastor. You hear things like, well, I wish I could go, quit work for 3 months or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of negative pushback if the pastor leads this charge, if you will. So if a pastor finds out about you, and more will today because of this podcast, do you help them kind of educate people why this is something that's valuable?
Yes. The first thing we do is there's always one person. I'm like, who's your person of peace? And usually it's somebody on the board or someone close to them. And I said, they need to not advocate with you, but for you.
Yes.
And right away, we talk about framing this as working differently. So the reason, as a matter of fact, we called it Menuah, is that's the Hebrew word for renewal. The word Sabbath actually just means to cease. And so it was really intentional. We're like, you are working toward renewal. And so we frame it around personal renewal, professional renewal, and spiritual renewal. And so that's where we start. Then we have, for the congregation, there's things like announcing it 3 months before you go, because there's a lot of stories about a pastor who one Sunday didn't show up. He's on sabbatical. 3 months later, he's done. And it's negative. So we've said, if you announce it 2 to 3 months before you go and you get up the next week and preach, all of a sudden any seedbed for rumors goes away. But we also have a 4-part, it's a 4-part outline sermon series on what is rest, what is Sabbath. Just observations like the first thing that God calls holy in all of creation is Sabbath. It's a day.
Yep.
And God created it. And The other part is when, there's a group of liberated slaves that come out of Egypt, and God is giving them 613 commandments on how to live a free life. And in the top 10 is Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
And not just the day, but then the seventh year, and then the 7 years, that there's something about this rest that God seems very interested in. So that's how we help them introduce it to the congregation. And we tell them, you're going to get pushback. That's just the way it is. And if you've not been preaching about rest and rhythms and health for the however many years you've been there, that resistance is going to be higher. But typically what we found is once people understand it and they understand what it can do for their pastor, they become a lot more receptive to it. And the negativity or the resistance is pretty marginal.
Cool. Hey, let's take a
Yeah.
short break. And once we do, Joe's going to come back with a question for you. But we're going to take a short break and then we'll be right back with Michael.
Yeah, so we're back here with Michael, and we're talking about sabbaticals and rest and pastor health, all of those things. Michael, you mentioned earlier that there's a vast difference between just people thinking, because I think it is very common in churches. Many times you've got people that, let's be honest, church members they're workers, they're out in the marketplace, they business owners, they're foremen, they're doing all these different things. So they're like, well, I work hard too. I want a break. And you mentioned earlier, there's a difference between a leave of absence and a real sabbatical. So I kind of would love for you to just press in a little more because you mentioned the three things earlier. I think personal, professional, and spiritual renewal is the
Mm-hmm.
focus, but kind of walk us through, say, what a traditional sabbatical or the ideal sabbatical might look like instead of just people thinking, oh, it's just a leave of absence. They're just going to take a nap the whole time and sit on the beach the whole time.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and let me start with leave of absence. Because a leave of absence is when there's been some kind of behavior that the pastor needs help with. Let me say it that way. I don't want
Yeah.
to frame
Yeah.
it in a
Yeah. Yeah.
horrible way.
Mm-hmm.
And often that's when people wake up and go, oh, something was going on in our pastor's life.
Mm-hmm.
And so research shows that Barna did incredible research on this in 2023. Vanderbloemen did more in 2024. And it shows that sabbaticals are renewing for pastors, and it actually serves to prevent those leave of absences.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you guys know when a leader makes poor decisions, the ripple effect and the shrapnel, I mean, it just goes everywhere.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about that, leave of absence is its own thing. And there's some great ministries that exist to help pastors in those moments. Sabbatical, I said, it's working differently. So it's a very intentional time. The personal renewal, that is vacation. And I hope every pastor listening realizes, like, you deserve, like you were saying, Dale, go sit on the beach for a while
Yes.
and read a novel that has nothing to do with your work. Play in the waves or go into the mountains with your family,
I don't
whatever it
suggest
is.
that you do that on sabbatical, but that's another podcast.
So yeah, the personal renewal, like for me, my first 2 weeks, when I took sabbatical year in 2022, was just learning the rhythms of sabbatical. So it was meeting with a spiritual director, I took, I think the first 3 or 4 days, silence and solitude, up in the mountains by myself. So it is that. And then the spiritual renewal part is, what are the areas of your life that need some tending, is how I would say it. So if you think about it, like, it's spring here in Denver, parts of our grass are dead. There's leaves coming into the trees, our garden on the side. Those are the things, they're not dead, but if we don't do anything with them, there's not going to be the growth that we need. So that's how I'd like to think about the spiritual renewal. And so I've had people talk about going, on a, there's, I'm trying to think of his name and I'm blanking right now, but there's a fella out in California that does retreats for pastors, renewal retreats. So it would be that kind of thing. It would be going to see a spiritual director. Maybe you're going to go see a counselor for the first time in your life. Maybe you're going to take silence and solitude. Maybe you're going to do, one guy I just coached is working through a book with someone who's long been a spiritual mentor in his life. Like that's a big part of what he's doing. And then the professional renewal is like for me, one year I went out and my focus for a month of it was I was working on a book. And so I just took a bunch of writing courses and I had never really written anything. They just liked my idea and said, write a book. And I thought, oh, shoot,
Here we go.
I got to learn to write. So it can be anything around what is it that's going to take your vocation and your work with this church and level it up. So the second one that I did a lot focused on leadership and did a leadership intensive, had a whole list of books I was reading. I met with business leaders in our faith community to learn from them, shadowed them. So it really, if you think about it, it provides this space and this time to approach these things that have long been on the shelf. And so that you come back not only renewed, but you come back actually better. You've learned, you've grown, and you're able then to step into that next season that you've been called to do. And you're able to do it with more tools in the toolbox. You're able to do it with a full tank. You're able to do it with, a new perspective on what the calling is. And yeah, I've yet to see someone come back from a sabbatical that says, I shouldn't have taken the time off. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, there's more and more research showing that when the congregation is engaged in it and not just informed, mm-hmm. they actually grow too. And so the relationship between pastor and congregation also grows, and everybody is served well through it.
When I was in high school, I had a 56 Chevy with a 4-barrel carburetor. And I used to have to stop every day and put gas in it, sometimes using change. Because it's just, I had to drive it slow, and it was not designed to do that. It's all jacked up in the back, but it was just like I was always running on empty. The reason I bring that up is I think the majority, it's very fair to say this, the majority of pastors don't even Sabbath. Mm-hmm. So as you were talking earlier about how, they need to get up and teach the congregation about Sabbath, I don't think you can do that if you don't observe that. What have you seen as you've worked with other churches and worked with pastors who don't already have the rhythm of Sabbath in place? I mean, before you do a sabbatical, I think you better figure out Sabbath.
Yeah, that's one of the first questions I ask is, what's your rhythm right now? And oftentimes there's just kind of a blank stare or silence, to your point, Dale. And I think part of it is establishing that. That's why we talked about like the 2 weeks off. But what are the things I start like the lowest hanging fruit, basically where are the 15 minutes every day that you can stop and actually be present with God. Harvard Business Review did a research that showed that executives who take 15 minutes to journal every day about what they learned, how they feel in the moment, and what tomorrow looks like, became, I think it was 22% more productive. And really, I mean, looking back, thinking about now and looking forward is the Examen from St. Ignatius. So I'm like, imagine that. You have these executives practicing a spiritual discipline and they're doing better. And I've often pointed to that with pastors and said, like, I'm just of the opinion, I don't think executives in the marketplace, not that there's anything wrong with that, mm-hmm. should be outperforming us and outresting us. And, I was in a church in Michigan, and I mean, there was the idea of like, hey man, everyone works hard. We got to match them pound for pound, step for step. And I thought, no, I think we should be an example to them of, even in the midst of swirling chaos and busyness, mm-hmm. that we are going to stop and we are going to rest and we are going to renew. And that was when I was at DCC, that was probably the only thing. I'm trying to think if this is true. I'll let you ask the staff. But it was really one of the only things that I was really, really hardcore about was our offices were closed Friday. you are off email, you're off your phone. And we were serious about rest and rhythms. We had a daily or weekly, we had daily, weekly, monthly, and annual, and for our staff. And our average tenure was over 12 years in the
Wow.
18 years that I was there,
It's awesome.
because people felt like they could sustain longer term.
I want to dive into something there before Joe comes with the next question. Your church was a larger church,
Hmm.
correct? Okay, I'm assuming you had a production staff, like the tech guys and all that kind of stuff.
No, we kept it pretty simple, honestly.
Really?
We had
Okay, but then the
we
reason,
had a worship pastor and a tech guy, and that was it.
oh, well, the reason I ask this is because a lot of churches that have what I would call tech production teams and stuff, they're the ones who get thrown under the bus when it comes to this,
Hmm.
because everybody on the staff is planning this and planning that, and they always need sound or lighting or whatever it's going to be. And I have observed over the years that those poor guys, they just get the leftovers. Have you seen anything like that at all?
Oh yeah, I think it's not just them. I think it's the administrative assistants. I think it's the people who are on the accounting and the business side.
Hmm.
We were really intentional. I mean, if you were on staff, you were on staff, which meant everyone got a sabbatical.
Okay.
Um, and it was,
Everyone
there
from
were
every position then.
everyone from every position
Okay.
was given sabbatical. And we've gone back there. We now attend. And one of the pastors there just went on sabbatical Sunday. And to tell you what's possible, when they announced that Joel was going on sabbatical, the whole place erupted in cheers.
That's
And
cool.
so our congregation has begun to understand. I mean, it's been a lot of years now that we've been doing it. Like, this is important.
Yeah.
And it's not framed as, oh, they're going to be gone for a few months and they'll come. They're going on sabbatical. Here's what they're doing. And so even the framing of it is, this is renewal. This is important for life of him and his family and for the life of the church. And but we gave it to everybody. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think we need to care for everyone. And when you talked about the people who are grinding every day outside the church,
Hmm.
I think as a spiritual voice in their life, as pastors, we can invite them toward what does Sabbath look like. We care about the Ten Commandments, except for the fourth. Is how I'd say it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Michael, I've had pastors look at me and say, I know what you're saying is true. No one's really ever confronted me with it, but I just don't think I'm going to do it. And I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that. You have, this is Genesis 3, I believe. I mean, this is or Genesis 2. It's the beginning where God institutes
Mhm.
this. It's not just Exodus and then on down the line and Jesus talking about it. This was in the beginning when God said, "Hey, as a human being, you need that day off."
Yeah. Well, and there's something beautiful within the Jewish tradition that's reflected in Hebrews 4 when the writer's talking about it still stands for us to enter his rest,
Hmm.
that it's this picture of the life to come, as the Jewish folks would say it. And in the Jewish mind, Sabbath was at the end of the week. So we worked toward rest. We didn't rest to work. And because of that, they said this idea of Sabbath, this whatever this holy thing is this eternity in disguise.
Mm.
And
Mm.
they believed that by God setting it apart in Genesis 2, that there was something sacred about our ability to be with God in that way or in that time, like we are at no other day of the week. And so I've had, people and pastors say, "Oh, I just can't do it." And I always just say, "Hey man, here's where it's disappointing is you're missing this sacred thing called time, a day that God instituted. And there's an invitation to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That it's an invitation that God's giving to all of us to be with him in a way that we are no other day of the week." And I had someone say to me, "How are you going to convince pastors to work with you?" I said, "We won't.
Mm-mm.
Pastors that we have to convince, we're here for you, but we're not going to try to convince you. We want people that see it and go, okay, I think we can do this." But I think it's such an important thing.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I mean, you mentioned it. There's so many pastors that are not doing this, and we see it all the time. They're, they're definitely not taking a sabbatical, but then like we talked on the more practical week to week, they're not taking Sabbath seriously at all. So what do you think are some of the common reasons for that? What are you seeing are there patterns that are very similar? Is it all over the place? What are you seeing from your angle?
Yeah, well, there's patterns. Um, I'm thinking about when I said to early on in my ministry years, I said to one of he said to me, "You know, the answer is no, correct?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "No, you don't." I didn't know how to say no. And one of the things I know about I think it's just part of the human condition is that when there's an emergency for me, it's an emergency for you, Joseph, and for you, Dale, and I need you
Yep.
right now.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of big-hearted, I know that there's a lot of big-hearted pastors out there. And when there is a need, they are going to be there.
Yep.
The underbelly of that is they need to be needed.
Yeah.
And I think
It's
that's
beyond the calling. It's beyond the
it
calling.
is beyond the calling.
Hmm.
And that's a whole other conversation. But I think once you realize, like, oh, I didn't make it to the hospital when they were there, or oh, I wasn't able to go to their house for dinner like they wanted me to. You do that a few times and you realize, like, you're still alive. They're still alive. It's fine. That um, there's a lot of freedom in not being needed. Let me say it that way.
Mm.
And there is too a little bit of an ego shot. Let's just be honest. Like
Absolutely.
I said, I stepped out. My last day was almost a year ago, and man, I'll tell you what, the phone calls and emails
Stopped.
really dwindled, really dwindled.
You find out
Um,
real quick you're not nearly as important as you thought you were.
no.
Mm.
And I had to do, I did a lot of work. I mean, part of the succession plan was me doing work of how bound is my identity to this role.
Hmm.
Um, because it's really easy to get far away from being a beloved son of the Almighty God,
Yep.
being a follower of Jesus, being made in his likeness and image. Like, it's really easy for that not to be enough, especially when you get the applause and the pats on the back and
Hmm. Attaboy.
told how great you are. So I think that's a big thing. I think the other piece is it's not been modeled widely
Mm-mm.
in the church. That's big church, small church. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
And I think we need more people out there who are in the trenches, which is, I mean, I think about the work pastors do day in and day out, and I did it for 26 years. And I miss it, by the way. Like,
Mm.
I don't miss the sermons or the programs or the plan. I miss tending to the sacred moments of, like, you invited me into your life and your loved one died.
Hmm.
Mm.
You asked me to stand in front of you and say, till death do you part. Like, these are incredible moments. And I think all of that can exist, but if we're not doing the work to show other people you can have all of that and you can have rest, we're shortchanging everyone. It's basically like sending a medic out in an ambulance when they're on crutches with a broken leg. Like,
Great.
you got the knowledge, you could probably somehow figure out how to get a mask on me or a IV in me, but no one wants to have that happen when they're in a car wreck. You know what I mean?
You made me remember something that I did. I've never told this on the podcast. Joe, you haven't heard this one, but I was
Oh,
so busy in our church that I forgot my mother was having surgery one morning.
Mm.
There was minor surgery, and she'd had several things over a period of time, but I didn't write it down, and I didn't find out till that afternoon that I'd missed it. Now, all of you who just drove out of the road understand it took me a long time to get over that one.
Mm.
But I was just
yeah.
so busy doing so much stuff that I missed my mother's surgery.
Yeah.
And obviously that's bad. That's bad, bad, bad. But I also want to flip this a little bit. I want you to speak to this. So what if I'm in a congregation that just expects me to do this and expects me to work all the time, and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm like, man, I want to do what he's saying, but my church won't let me. Talk to that person.
Yeah, I guess the question would be, at what cost? What is it going to cost you? What is it going to cost your spouse, your family, your kids? And I think it's a two-way street. When a congregation places demands on you and you live up to those demands and expectations, what you're telling them is this is the way it's going to
Yeah,
work.
bring it on, bring it on, bring it on.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I know, I mean, I've seen the ugliest side of church. I've seen the most beautiful side of church, which I think those go hand in hand. I think something that can be so beautiful can, the more beautiful it can be, the more ugly it can be.
Amen.
Um, but I think it's hard for me to believe that if you find that person of peace or people of peace in your congregation, and I'm speaking, like you said, Dale, to those who are out there wondering, what do they do? And just sit down with them and say, man, I'm tired. Um, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I need help. Like they're placing demands on you. Um, we're supposed to carry one another and care for one another. You're like, who's caring for you in all of this? And so I think if you're able to do that and be honest and you're not Superman, or maybe you are and there's kryptonite everywhere, and really open up that vulnerable side, not for an outcome, but just to be honest, and then begin to say, we need to figure something out here. Um, and I will say this, one of the things, when I came to Denver Community Church, there was 40 people. And within a few weeks, someone said, hey, I know there's, a lot of, big homeless community here. We want to do something with that. And I had no idea, like I couldn't do it.
Mhm.
So I said, give me 2 weeks. And I did some research and talked to some people and found one of the best ministries in Denver doing work with the homeless community. And I went back to this person and said, I found a group. Would you be willing to be a liaison between us and them? And they were like, no. I said, okay. They said, well, are we going to do something? And I said, well, I just invited you to do something. But until someone steps into that role, we're not going to do anything. And I did it out of necessity. If I'm really honest, there's a bit of laziness in there. um, but what we began to find is that when people see that they can use their skills and their talents and their gifts for the work of the kingdom to contribute to something they deeply care about,
Mhm.
and most people care deeply about their local church,
Mhm.
when you can capture that and empower that and equip them and mobilize them, you, I have seen it over and over. You unlock an unstoppable force. Um, I'll never forget. We had a guy. He actually worked for the SEC, and he was on our finance team. So you can be sure our finances were, right up
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And we were out one night, and he had been on our deacon team for a couple weeks or a couple months. Sorry, and he said, I never thought like my work at the SEC and everything I know about finance could ever like find a way to serve a church. And he was elated, like he loved it. And so you most churches have at least somebody who's good with finances, if not a CPA or a financial planner. Most people have someone who know how to run a CRM and help with volunteering. Most churches have somebody who's deeply pastoral and cares well for individuals. And I think part of leading is not only identifying those people and those gifts, but empowering them to use it in service of the kingdom and in service of one another and in service ultimately of our world as the church.
Mhm.
And so I said a lot. I would say start with, if you're listening and you're tired and you're sick of the demands, ask yourself, what's the cost? Be honest with one or two people in your congregation and begin asking for help, because I think people there will actually help far more than you might realize. And you might lose some, and that's part of the game.
And
Absolutely.
that's so good. I know you were talking earlier about kind of a network of pastors or kind of I'm gonna call it like the bench that they can that they can call on. All right, there's the subs are waiting to get in the game. So if there's someone listening and they're like, man, I need a sub, or on the other side, if they want to be a sub, what does that process look like? and how might someone get involved or reach out for help, Michael?
Yes, great question. Well, I told our team when we launched I wasn't going to build a plane in flight. And here we are building a plane in flight because people have started to come out of the woodwork, which is awesome. So we sought the wisdom of Todd Rhodes at Chemistry Staffing. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
familiar with Todd.
we're connected to them.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And um, initially we were like, hey, can we just steal your software? In the very righteous sense.
Yeah. And he said no.
So no, he didn't say no. He said, you know what? See what you need first, and then let's circle back.
Yeah.
So we have replicated, not exactly, but a little bit of what they've done. So if somebody's interested in being on the bench, to use your word, Joseph, what we do is we have an assessment. We're working right now. I just had a call this morning on creating an asynchronous interview process where, a church can see candidates. But when we have the assessment for pastors, we also have a mirror assessment for churches. So if a church reaches out to us, we always have an initial engagement either on the phone or on Zoom, because we want to keep this really about the human heart and people and relationship, not just this system that you enter. But the first step is taking the assessment. That way we can say, okay, here's some people that you can connect to. With this next step that we're looking to implement of the asynchronous interview, you now get to watch this individual respond to some of the questions that you as a church have for them. And then, we give them a short list and they determine who they want. And then the other thing that's important to know for a potential pastor is we ask them to go in 3 to 4 weeks before the sabbatical to be an attender. So the pastor who's going on sabbatical or taking a few weeks off points to that individual. They're identified. They get the feel of the church. They begin to meet a few people. So it's not like this transaction where one Sunday our pastor's here, next Sunday he's gone, and this other person's here. So ultimately, that's the process. To do that right now is just emailing me or getting on menuah.org. Yes, we're right between technology with a new website. So you still have to put in the www.menuah.org.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're old.
I know. Well, yeah. So what happens when you start off with zero money? But they can also just contact us there on the form, and then we'll get back to them and start moving things forward with them for those who are interested.
We'll have your email and the website, all that in the show notes. Okay, as we wrap
Awesome.
up the podcast, here's what I want you to do. I want you to dream a little bit, because you mentioned that at one point today. If this thing really goes where you believe it's going to go, what's it going to look like in 10 years?
Yes. In 10 years, we will have regional directors throughout the country. So Menuah is decentralized. So what I'm doing now, there will be leaders doing that around the country. So you take something huge and you break it up into parts.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bench that Joseph talked about, they would all be regional. So they're driving distance from the congregations that they're serving. And our heart with thinking about those regions, because right now we've talked about up to 10 regions, would be 200 churches a year, which sounds crazy, but I'm like, that's 20 churches each year
It's
for
a drop
each region.
in the bucket too.
It is. And I had a friend who said to me, he said, what do you want to accomplish? I was like, if just one church. And he said, stop. He said, Bill Bright, when he was at Crew, used to talk about hundreds of thousands of people, and they thought he was insane. And he said, how many churches do you want to serve? And I said, in 20 years, if we've served 5,000 churches, I'll be over the moon. And I really do think it's possible.
It is.
And I think right now it's learning what we don't know and, continuing to partner with people like not just 95 Network, but people across the country. And, but it's a crisis. I think that's where I'd finish. The statistics are sobering.
Yes.
So when people are like, this is a great idea, I'm like, thanks. And it's deeply needed. I'm excited for what's ahead for us.
I think the difference, if I'm honest, with having you on today talking about this, is your dream has come out of rest, where the Lord spoke to you and gave you direction to do something, whereas most of the people who get to this place got there because they crashed and burned. And so I'm
Hmm.
really thankful that you had ears to hear what the
Oh,
Lord was
thanks.
saying, because I'm hoping over, one of the things that God's put in our heart is to come along beside 1,000 churches in the next 10 years to help them be healthy. And the first step of that is soul care, to where it's the
Hmm.
pastor, the staff, the leadership, and the church itself has an atmosphere of health in the arena of
Yeah.
soul care. So there's so much to be done. But it's exciting to know that because we already knew this, but you've confirmed it. God's speaking right now. He's
Yeah.
speaking. He's drawing, and he's redefining what American church life looks like. And
Hmm.
and there's a lot of change that's got to come. And that's why a lot of the questions Joe and I asked today come from the angle of what has been. But I'm really pumped about what's going. I want to tell you now, even on the podcast, before we even go off, recording, we're here for you. Any way we
Oh,
can
thank
step
you.
up as a team at 95 Network with our ministry. There's no need for you to reinvent the wheel if we can serve together to accomplish some of this together, because your heart is our heart as well. So, man,
Yeah.
I love what you're doing. I appreciate it. Now I know my Lance told me you were a good guy. I mean, I know this is his passion as well. And
Yeah.
honestly, for the truth is, it's overwhelming if all of us try to do it on our own. We've got to do this together. So,
Yeah.
thank you for following the voice of the Lord, and we're looking forward to what He has for us together in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be with you guys, Dale and Joseph. Thanks for welcoming me.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.